look like. All right. Hi, everyone. I am super excited to be here with David Lukas. If you don't know already, David Lukas has several books, popular books about birds out, and I believe seven books published. And he's currently doing a lot of videography and photography. And I'm really excited to talk to you tonight, David.
Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome, Marley. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So I think just kind of to get things started, there's a couple things that I want to talk about tonight, but to get things started, maybe we could hear you describe your ideal nature outing. What would your ideal nature outing look like?
I was going to start with a mystery question for everyone, but I can start with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll be walking in the Sierra Nevada, and we're in a wet meadow area. And I found this amazing thing on the ground. And what I'm describing here is about 2.5 inches across, say, perfectly round, heavy rock. This is probably what, white, so it's quartz or something. Any ideas what this is? So I observed that it's a perfectly round 2.5-inch rock. It looks like it's been rubbed smooth. It's a natural object. Any idea what this is?
All right, great. So post in the comments, anyone, if you have an idea of what that object is.
And I have a good guess, but I have to admit I don't know that for a fact. I've never found anyone that knows definitively, but I think I know what it is. So I want to see if anyone.
Can we ask like questions to narrow it down a little bit?
Sure.
Are there biological processes involved?
I believe so. Yes. I do not believe this is. Well, it's naturally occurring, but it's not like geology or forces of nature.
But you said it is quartz.
Well, I don't know what other white rock there would be in the Sierra Nevada granite landscape like this. So,
okay, we've got Susan Stanley on Facebook is guessing oak gall.
That's fantastic.
That's what I thought first, but it is. We can confirm it's made out of quartz, right?
Yeah, it's very heavy. I mean, if you held it in your hand, it's got a lot of heft to it. And in a bog area in the high mountains in granite and everything, so no oak trees there, but it looks exactly like the gall. The reddish color on it you see is staining from the peat bog that it was in. It's not like an oak gall that would be stained red.
Okay, great. So we have another narrowing question from Eli. Eli is asking, would you find more than one? Is it very rare?
I love that. Well, I have never found anything like this in my life. You, Marley? Anyone else see anything? I mean, I was like so baffled and blown away by this.
Yeah.
So yes, let's say rare, right?
Okay. Is it anthropogenic?
So that is a great question. That was my first thought. Is I thought it was some kind of like ballast for a Native American fishing net or something, or maybe even like some sort of what do you call it, bolo thing that you would throw at animals, something like that. But there's no sign of any kind of indention around it that you would use to tie twine, and I don't think there's any reason to construct something like this to throw it. So that is that was my first original guess for a long time until I came to what I think is the answer.
All right. Any more guesses from the audience? I have a couple. My mind's going crazy on this topic. So if anyone else wants to chime in before I do.
This is also kind of a tangent from your original question from the reason for our talk, but I thought I would start with a fun little mystery of like, how does a naturalist work and how do we find cool things in the field that we don't know what the heck? This is the most mysterious thing I've ever found in my life, I have to admit.
Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Rose asked, in what environment was it found? And it was found in a bog.
Marshy area.
A marshy area in the Sierra Nevada.
Yeah.
Okay, while people are thinking, I don't want to throw my ideas in there too soon. I'm just going to say hi to some of the people here in the chat. Nature Sketches, Annetta is here. Rose, Marilyn, Eli, Susan, Lori, Danny, Angie, Jean, and Ivea and Lori are all in the chat. Thank you all for joining. And I know there's some other people watching who aren't in the chat, and we're trying to solve this mystery right now. Okay, so I guess my next question would be, was it inside of an animal?
Well, no, not when I found it, but
Oh, okay.
yeah. I mean, this was just laying on the ground in the mud. But
do you think it might have been inside an animal at some time?
No, but I think it's connected to an animal. So Eli's comment's great. But why so perfectly round? I mean, that is the thing that just absolutely blows me away. Is it's almost flawlessly round, and it's so smooth. I mean, it's not like the rough texture of a rock. It's almost like it's been polished, but there's a fascinating texture to it, kind of a little wrinkled, grooved texture that's very, very fine all the way around.
I think that fecalith.
Fecalith. I've never seen that word. Is that like something that comes out in poop? Is what you're thinking? Right,
David. I think you're going to have to add this to your list of nature words.
So I do a nature word of the day on Facebook sometimes, and this would be a great word. I've never heard.
Definitely, I think you should put it on your nature word of the day. Awesome. Maya just joined in. Thank you, Danny, for that. I think that's going to have to go up on his nature word of the day, and we'll get into that word thing later.
Yovea
joined in.
Yovea asked a great question too. Do I think it spent some time being submerged in the bog? And are there signs of it? Yes, and the staining on the rock, I think, would be very difficult to get here unless it had been there for quite a long period of time. So, stony mass from the intestines. Yep. Well, should I? Do you want to go ahead and
let's go for it? Because that's kind of where I think Danny and I are sort of on the same track.
Okay.
I thought maybe it was one of those things that like a dinosaur had in its gizzard or something.
I will go ahead and just go right to what I think it is. I think it's what's called a mountain beaver baseball. You ever heard of that?
No.
So mountain beavers live in boggy areas and are common in Sierra Nevada, and they need to chew on things constantly. And I think that this is an artifact that it had in its den, chewing on every rough edge until there's no more rough edges left over a very long period of time. And I've heard the term mountain beaver baseball, but I've never been able to find anything about it in any of my research. But I think that has to be what it is.
That's really crazy.
Yeah. So a rodent with fast-growing teeth needing to chew on a really hard surface and just work edges and work edges and work edges until there's nothing left except perfectly smooth ball.
Wow.
Anyway, so I guess that's kind of a snapshot of an ideal nature walk.
so your ideal nature walk is finding a mountain beaver baseball in a bog in Sierra Nevada.
Yeah. No, I am always looking for fecaliths. That's my preference. My ideal walk is you can see behind me I've got a lot of books. I have 10 bookcases, 7 feet tall, all natural history books. I've spent my whole life reading them. I study like crazy. And I always used to joke on nature walks that I know as much about the stock market and Hollywood gossip as I do about the natural world. I just devour everything. And then at the moment of going out for a nature walk with a bunch of people, I put it all aside and just improvise in the moment with whatever we find. Just riff off of ideas and play. And it's like jazz with ideas and observations. And I don't know what something is. I find something, oh my God, I've never seen this before. I'm so amazed that everyone else is amazed. And they pick up on the excitement. And we just say, well, what about and what if? And we start asking questions and bouncing ideas back and forth. And at the end of the walk, we are all coming back just buzzy and excited and amazed. And that is the perfect walk in my mind, is having done all the work preparing for it, preparing lots of ideas and stuff, but then not having any script, not having anything specific to say, and just riffing on whatever we find and being in the moment, inquiring with people about the mysteries that amaze all of us. So that's perfect. Great question, Marley.
Yeah, well, I have some follow-up questions because that's an interesting answer. So it sounds like what you're saying is more about the perspective and the interaction with the people that you're with, as opposed to like where and what you're seeing.
Yeah. Well, I think that comes from just spending my life leading thousands of walks, and it ends up being that a lot of my time in nature is with groups of people that
Hmm.
I'm sharing with people, and and that's something we could talk about later too. Is one of the really fascinating tensions that naturalists have to face is I think a lot of us are loners and we just want to be in nature and spend all the time just kind of geeking out in the natural world and just thinking and observing and sketching and writing about. Uh, but that only goes so far. If the calling is really to share our experiences and our knowledge and ideas with people, and so we're called to be in groups so much of the time. And sometimes when I'm trying to work and make money, which is hard to do as a naturalist, I'm out every single day with groups. I mean, I have really have had not a single summer in my adult life that I wasn't not leading groups as often as I did and committed long in advance. So there's that tension between being with groups and wanting to be alone in nature that is probably one of the greatest tensions that I face as a naturalist. And maybe
Hmm.
you've experienced it too, or other people have.
Yeah, well, that's super interesting, and we'll get into that in a bit. I think it would be really interesting to talk a little bit about landscapes here at the beginning of the conversation before we go into birds and words and being a naturalist and how you got there, because we are going to be doing a course in 2 weeks. Uh, in about, I think it's a week and a half, we're going to be doing a course, and I'll post the link pretty soon. And it's going to be about landscape painting because you live in a really beautiful place now, and this was an idea that I had talking to you earlier. And then when I looked at your website, I noticed that the word landscape actually came up in some of your in some of the writing on your website. So could you tell me a little bit about? I think like a lot of people when they get into nature, they're really interested in like birds or they're interested in flowers. Which seems pretty micro. So, what is the draw of landscape, and is that even a category of nature? Like a lot of the nature connection, supposedly birding is the most popular way that people interact with nature, birding and like gardening. So what is the draw of landscapes and why is that important? And are there a lot of people like where is that as a hobby or a way of connecting with nature?
Mhm. Well, I think as a hobby, it would be people that are hikers and backpackers.
Hmm.
Just they're out there for the landscape.
Hmm.
And so I think there's probably a very, very large subset of people, even more than them, that are just absolutely totally tuned into landscapes. I love to be a long distance runner, and the passion for that for me is moving through landscapes. It's like
Hmm.
a rhythm, it's a flow, it's a breathing up and down hills, and in and out of canyon systems, and following a river canyon, then coming up over a ridge into a new canyon system. And for me, that is the greatest pleasure. And just personally, I get a lot more out of that than I do laying on my belly looking at the details. But that's just my
Hmm.
personal preference. I
So do you think
love.
that's something that all humans share? And why do you think we're interested in that landscape?
Yeah, great question. I don't know. I mean, it's part of just how we feel at home, and I think the ability to zoom in and zoom out into the details and out to the landscape and paying attention to that process and that energy and that movement is what truly brings us home. I don't think it would work to just know landscapes. And one of the pleasures of being a naturalist and sharing experiences with other naturalists is that people know the names of so many species and have observed so many plants and animals, and they also appreciate the larger view. And that
Hmm.
ability to walk with a group and share the zoom in, zoom out kind of way of looking at the world is so beautiful.
Zoom
It's
in,
such,
zoom out.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that.
And
Awesome.
having
Well,
having the pieces fit together when you do that too. Like as you zoom in and out, you're like pulling threads of imagination and perception with you as you're going back and forth, and it's all connected. It's not like a jumping to different scenes. And maybe
yeah,
that kind of
totally.
stitching is what makes us feel part of the fabric.
Hmm. So how do you think that appreciation of landscape plays into nature journaling? So like if I showed you, let me see if I can find some nature journal pages here, for example, like on this nature journal page right here. I have, this is on the coast, and actually yeah, so this is near the coast. This is a gopher. This is some seagull stuff, and this is a close-up of a rock showing like sea anemones and mussels. These are quick sketches, but
Yeah.
do you, most of these things are kind of zooming in. How would you're mentioning some threads connecting things. Like, how would I think about landscape, and how did thinking about landscape from a nature journaling perspective like affect the way that I'm seeing and connecting with nature there? Or how could I pull in, like you're describing this amazing experience of running, long distance running. If I'm nature journaling and I'm kind of like in one spot, how can I pull in some of that that beautiful experience into my nature journal page?
Wow. Well, great question.
If
So
possible.
yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to find your own answer for that. So I think in terms of schematics of ideas and diagrams of concepts. So I would think about like trying to diagram out the feeling of moving in and out of like the positive side of a hill and the negative space of a canyon, and playing with the dark and light or opposites and how they create a pattern in the larger landscape. So that when you have the details like you just showed and shared with us on your journal page, there's a vessel that holds all of those observations. So what you showed on that page is beautiful, but there's no vessel that my mind can see those things inside of. And I think that that's what landscape is going to do for us.
Cool. So maybe even we can use our words to capture some of the landscape.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even like I like the idea of schematics and graphic elements, whether it's like arrows and diagrams and pyramids and squares and circles, just really stylized stuff like that might be fascinating to play with also. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little teeny bit more about our class because I'm really excited. You're bringing photographs and potentially video, and we're going to do this combined class that people can sign up for. And I'm going to teach how to paint a landscape. And we're going to go on like a virtual tour where you take us through photos on this trip in the Washington Mountains. And I will talk about how to turn that into landscapes. And I'll just show a couple landscapes here. This is a full page one, but most of what we're going to be doing is going to be a lot smaller in the nature journaling style of landscapitos. And this is something you can do even at a zoo. So this was at a zoo, and right here you can see how just a quick landscape. This is the main sort of style of quick landscapes that I'll be teaching in that class. And I just wanted to say right now that the first three people that post why they want to be in the class in the comments are going to get free passes to the class. And for everyone else, it's going to be, I think it's $19.99. And I'll post the link to the class here. But the first three people who post a couple sentences about why they want to be in the class will get a free pass. But I just wanted to mention the class kind of early on in the video because sometimes people don't watch the whole thing. But maybe this will be a little segue. I noticed in looking at some of the stuff on your website, maybe you're familiar. Are you familiar with this book?
Mm-hmm.
You might be familiar. Didn't you live for a while with Gary Snyder?
I did. Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Maybe we can transition from landscapes into some of the other work that you've done via Gary Snyder, and because Gary Snyder is a pretty well-known poet. So I feel like on your website it said something about how spending time with him affected did you decide to study English after your time with him?
Okay, should I share a picture?
Yeah, let's see it.
Does that work? Let's see. Does that work?
Yes, let me put it up here.
Okay, so we're experimenting with sharing screens. So yes, I lived and worked with Gary for over the course of 10 years, and I could tell the story of that, which is really fascinating. And I think that's a great segue. So you come back down. We don't need all that up, right? So I started off as a nerdy naturalist, and should I do my whole story a little bit more?
Sure, yeah. Right now, we're not seeing the image yet, though.
Oh, I put it up and then I took it down.
Okay.
But you said you saw it for a second. I think I have to do this. Can you see it now?
Yes, it's just not selected on an individual one. I just see the sort of screen there with the.
How do I? Well, this is part of our test run here. Was trying to share.
Yeah, I think that when you first start the share screen, there's the option to choose whether it's like a window or the whole screen, and it looks like you're sharing the whole screen right now.
Okay. Well, we're just experimenting with this technique and learning how to do this ourselves here. So, yeah, I don't see how the option. So anyway, I was just going to share that, but I guess it doesn't work. So, okay.
Did you try opening one of those up?
That's what I did. I didn't share it automatically with you. It just opened it on my screen.
Okay. All right, no worries.
Go
ahead and tell us the story behind that, though.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story because let's see. So, a little bit about how I started to be a naturalist is I started, like all of us, so we say, when I was 5 years old. I started memorizing pictures and field guides. And literally memorizing all the pictures and field guides. And then when I could read, I memorized the text in field guides. And I don't know when I decided this, but by the time I was 8, I was already a member of scientific societies and getting scientific journals. And by the time I was 8, I already knew that I was going to be a professor of zoology and get a PhD. And my entire childhood was like a laser beam focused on natural history, preparing to be a professor. I sort of assumed that professor was the most prestigious and the highest level of what you could do to be a naturalist. I wanted to be a naturalist. So I was reading Darwin when I was 8 years old. And so I thought that's just what you had to do to make a living as a naturalist. And then I got to college and absolutely hit rock bottom. I could not tolerate how they taught biology in the classroom. No field experiences, no field ecology classes, entirely genetics, cellular biology. And I just flunked out and dropped out. And then in order to keep that spirit alive, I spent 10 years traveling around the world working on scientific research projects. So I could still be intellectually engaged with the natural world, still be out every day, but not pursuing the normal academic pathway. And during that time, I spent 13 months in Borneo and working on a Harvard research team. And when I was there, I took with me a book of Gary's poetry, Turtle Island. It was the only book I took for 13 months at an extremely remote, very primitive research station. And I hated his poetry, by the way, at the time. But I knew I was supposed to like it. So I was like, I'm going to take this one book and I'm going to force myself to understand why I'm supposed to like this for a year. Well, the end result of that 13 months is that I got what Gary was trying to do and had decided that I wanted to be a writer. And I was working on this research team with world famous scientists who are working tirelessly to save rainforests from destruction and doing all they could to get the message out. And I just realized that these scientists were not able to communicate scientific ideas clearly to the public. And I realized that a writer or a naturalist, like all of us, serve an important role as a translator of scientific information for a general audience. And so that's why you would want to write, is to take the scientific research that you know how to read and understand and the field experiences that you have and turn them into stories to tell people, to make in their eyes and imagination. So I decided when I was in Borneo, I was going to live and work with Gary. And when I met him 5 years later for the first time, I walked right up to him and I said, I'm going to come live and work with you. I dropped out of college and showed up on his doorstep a month later and stayed for 10 years. So that's how I ended up with him here. Yeah.
Dang, that's an amazing story. Borneo must have been. What were you looking at in Borneo?
So we were at a very pristine site, untouched, unexplored site. It's now that Borneo's been destroyed, it's one of the last relatively intact places on the entire island. It's incredible. And our job was just to take every day and document, just have field notebooks. And this is where I developed the habit of having a field notebook in my pocket. And And our job was to go out every day before sunrise and hike for the entire day and write down everything we observed. And then the professor was turning it all into like a massive landscape level understanding of how rainforests functioned. So,
wow, that seems like a really old school approach.
yeah, amazing to just like have a notebook, and our job was to jot down every idea, every insight, every little tiny nugget of an observation we had was our job for 13 months.
Yeah, well, that seems really empowering for nature journalers in this day and age. I think a lot of people don't feel like they're making science. So, could you say a little bit about why you think that just walking and writing down your observations on paper counts as science?
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. But I'm getting a lot of static from you. Is anyone else getting static? So
I am hearing something, and I'm not sure what it is, or I would be able to.
Yeah, I only hear it when you're talking. Person who else is talking, but
yeah, what I'm hearing is a garbled sound. Let me check my speaker here real quick, but I haven't been having this issue lately, so I'm not sure. I can try changing my microphone and see how that works.
Okay, so it's coming from it's everyone's comments is supporting that, and
okay,
it's very staticky and buzzy.
Okay, how about now? I'm using a different microphone.
Crystal clear.
Wow. Okay.
And Angie says both of us. So is that true, Angie? That it's me too? I hope not. Okay.
Jiggle some wires. There we go.
Well, yours is crystal clear now. But anyway, so want to repeat that question and idea if you remember? Because that was a great.
I think.
Okay, how writing down journaling is science, right?
No. Right. Yeah, I think a lot of nature journalers who don't have a science background feel like they're not. They feel intimidated or they don't feel like what they're doing counts as science. So can you explain like how in that instance the professor was specifically asking for that instead of like, you're not out there collecting DNA from like a certain, soil fungus or something like that?
So in this case, the professor was testing a really important and straightforward idea, which is that when you set aside a huge national park, in this case, it went all the way from mangrove swamps to cloud forest on top of a mountain range on the coast. So it did an incredible transect through habitats. It was a vast area, a huge park. And we had a huge trail system of, 75 miles or something like that. And so the idea is if you set aside a national park, you need to know that over seasons and over years, as the climate is different and as weather patterns change and the food sources move and change, that the animals are using all the habitats that they need for a full cycle, not just in 1 year and one season. Like, the animals are doing great. They're eating all the food they want. But maybe every 10 years, there's a horrible drought. And then there's one plant that's fruiting off in a different habitat. And if it's not inside the park boundaries, that animal's going to go extinct. So basically what we were doing is collecting as many observations as we could of what animals we were seeing, what fruits, because we were studying that relationship between animals and fruit, which is the main food source there. So the animals and the fruits, where the fruit was and where the animals were day by day by day by day over time. And then that could be correlated with weather patterns and climatic changes. And we were also measuring how many fruit there were in different tag trees. And from that, you get a landscape level view of where did the animals need to go in the landscape over a long time frame? And is the park being designed and shaped in the right way to encapsulate all those critical habitats? So really simple question, right? And those kinds of observations all added up. And then in terms of the practice of writing things down, it was so amazing. I had never thought of this before. It's my journal right here. To just have that with me in my pocket and to pull it out for any thought that crosses your mind. You're like, oh, what an incredible thought. I'm going to remember that tonight. You never do. So to just give yourself permission to jot down, and really the requirement to jot down every little thing that crosses your mind, everything thing that is just a fragment or a figment of an idea or an intact idea or a cool word or a phrase or anything, jot it down in the moment and give yourself permission to and pursue that. And that begins to build an incredible body of work, and you remember things later that way. So that was a huge turning point in my life to learn that it was okay and to force myself to just pull out my notebook whenever the most irrelevant seeming thought crossed my mind. Then later I'm racking my brain trying to remember what the heck was that brilliant idea I had that's gone now.
Yeah, that's a great one. So for people who are really worried about like trying to make a really aesthetically beautiful nature journaling page, but that is keeping them from like writing down these other thoughts, like what recommendations would you give to those people?
Mm-hmm. Well, just give yourself permission. You have to give yourself permission. And you'll be so thankful for all the things that you've captured if you just do that. And so, like in my little pocket notebooks, I'm not doing a lot of sketching because I'm more of a writer, but you could sketch. But the thing is the words I'm capturing are just it could be fragments of words, fragments of ideas, things that just seem really irrelevant, but in the moment it tickles my imagination. And so it's not even like I'm drawing an arrow to a sketch and saying, this thing has 5 ribs here, or it's dark brown here. It's not even like that concretely connected. It's just some weird fragment of some words. And that is worth capturing too. It turns out that stuff is priceless. Easily mined later for longer sentences, longer ideas, and more inspiration in a different kind of writing or a different journal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, everyone, you have permission from us, and you have to give permission to yourselves to write all of this stuff down in your journal. And I do want to address this question. Valerie asked if either I or David are on Patreon. David, are you on Patreon yet?
No, I should.
David is not on Patreon yet, but he has been doing some of these collaborations with John Muir Laws lately. And on his website, you can support his work through a donation, just like the way that John Muir Laws does it. David has a website with a PayPal donate button there. So he's been doing a lot of stuff for the nature journaling community for free. So check out his website there, and I'll post it in the comments so that you all can see it there.
Thank you for mentioning it, Marley. It's just
yeah.
Putting together the content is basically my full-time job, but it's not like I get paid for it.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. So I'm gonna just go ahead and put that into the comments as well in case people want to check it out. Even a little bit makes a difference. So, and he has a lot of other stuff on his website as well. Valerie, thanks for asking that question. I am on Patreon, and if you just go to Patreon and search for Marley Pfeiffer, you'll find me there. Cool. And we're going to do a nature journal show in a couple weeks with several nature journal educators who are on Patreon now, including Amaya, who was here watching a little bit ago.
Yep.
All right, so let's jump into words a little bit more. What do you think is the connection between words and nature?
Wow. Well, I'm trying to push that boundary all the time. So I'm trying to get my imagination to take words apart into pieces and then see that in the landscape. So when I look at trees on a hillside, I want to be looking at syllables of words. I'm just trying to push the boundaries of the connection between observation and language. And I don't have any answers, and I don't know why I'm doing that, but I want to see words in the landscape, and I want to see the landscape of my words, and I want to just bring those things together as much as I can in my lifetime and just keep pushing those boundaries. And I think of words as malleable clay that you just pull them apart and mush them and twist them and play with them to see if you can find ways that express things more clearly or uniquely or that inspire your emotions. So I'm always looking to play with words and kind of layer them on the landscape in any way possible. So, and that quest led me to, I wrote a book, Language Making Nature, which is an exploration of how to create new words in the natural world, and looking at the rules and the principles and parts of the English language and how to play with the different rules and make up your own and create new words. So,
Yeah, that's really cool. I don't know very many other people who talk about words and language the way that you do. So, I guess
and
one of the
I was going to say, you might have a good question, but I wanted to say one of the reasons behind this pursuit is that whoever makes up new words is going to define the conversation of our time. And right now, who makes up the new words that we use every day? Well, mostly it's corporations, technologies. We would all happily say, oh, my MP3 player or my iPad. These things are not words. They're totally made up, yet we accept them in daily discourse without even hesitating. And these are things that have been given to us, and they become the values that we talk about. They become the source of our conversation. So my idea is that whoever comes up with new words defines the conversation of our time. And if we're letting someone else do it, they're going to define the values that matter to us. And it's up to us to name the values that matter to us and carry them forward in time, because the values that get named are what people talk about. So
wow,
it's not just a frivolous idea.
Mm-hmm. Have you looked at sort of like lists of new words that are being added to the dictionaries and sort of categorize them by whether they're related to technology or related to other things?
No, I haven't followed what new words getting added.
I would just guess, but like I would guess that most of the new words that are being added to the English language every year are not related to nature, for example.
Right. Yep. So I think the majority of the new words that are being added come from two sources. One is technology and corporations, and the other is youth. And youth are fantastic at creating they're just so fluid and playful in their slang and everything. But my realization is, well, first of all, the corporation stuff, I'm not interested in perpetuating those ideas necessarily. And youth, I love the energy and the fluidity of their thinking and willingness to play, but none of it's grounded in a deep understanding of values and the history and the precedent of our English language and the sources of our English language. So I'm thinking, why not do a deep dive in understanding the meaning of English history and English words and how words are put together and where they come from, and combine that with a more mature sense of values to create new words? And why don't we all just play as much and as fluidly as young people do? And as naturalists making up tons of incredible new words. And one of the things I realized in working on my book is that if you look at Thoreau from 150 years ago, the words that Thoreau uses 150 years ago are the same words we're using now. Now, that's not terribly exciting. I love Thoreau. But if the language isn't changing, it's not going to inspire new generations to get excited about nature. So why isn't the language of nature as playful and freeform and wild and unrefined as everything we're seeing in the natural world?
Yeah, that is really cool. What do you think about could you talk a little bit more about creating new words and how maybe nature journalers could sort of dabble in that a little bit?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's no right way, and it's, you could, so I think you could create new words. You could play with new ways of putting words together also, and new ways of using words. So you don't need to invent new words. You could just put together really cool phrases like a poet would, and that works too. Just, naming things with new ideas. But, you could play with different suffixes. You could play with moving syllables around. You could play with dropping or adding letters. So any of those ways of playing. And in the book, I try to come up with a whole bunch of exercises and ways of thinking about playing with words. So your question is a good one, but I have an entire book about different ways of doing that.
So people should check out the book. I put a link in here for people to check out the book. Do you, Angie's asking if you have an example of maybe a made up word that you've come up with or something like that.
Yeah, I get that question all the time. No, I don't. I don't have any on the top of my mind right now, and I knew someone was going to ask.
So on your Facebook you have that thing where you have these nature words. Are those new words or are those ones that already exist in the language?
Most of the time, the words I use for my nature word of the day are old words that are really cool that I want to bring forward. So that is one of the really rich sources of new words is old words that have been left behind.
Right,
and someone mentioned McFarlane and his work. Highly recommend Robert McFarlane's book Landmarks, and you mentioned the book The Lost Words, which is more of a kid's version. And he really is a fan of bringing forward old words too. And I'm more of a fan of creating new words. And we talk a lot together and work together a lot because we're both working on the same question, but from slightly different angles.
Great. Okay. I feel like this could be a topic for a whole show in itself. But I have one final thing about this, because at the Wild Wonder Conference, I helped facilitate one of the breakout sessions and during a Pencil Miles and Chill group, which is Ivea's awesome project. And it was a breakout group about language and nature journaling, because so far nature journaling is really strong in English, and most of the books, for example, are in English. Jack has translated some of his stuff, but not a ton. So what do you think about when there's a movement or sort of a trend, a cultural trend or whatever that is completely in one language? How does that impact that movement if it's mostly in one language?
Well, each language has a different capacity for expressing concepts and relationships between ideas. And the more of those you have, the deeper the way language helps us understand our time and our world. So as soon as you start narrowing it down to one language, you lose all those other valuable potential relationships and insights that are lost. So, yeah. And one of the things that I really like about the book that I wrote and the idea that I was working on there is that English is meant to be a very fluid, plastic language that moves and shapes, and it's one of the most famous languages in the world for how it absorbs other words and other languages and weaves it into the English matrix. And so that whole idea that there isn't one way to spell words, there isn't one way to write, that anything can come in and become part of English is welcoming to any culture. Anyone who comes into into America doesn't have to learn English. They can bring their own language and start weaving those words and those ways of thinking about language into English, and it would be welcomed. So it becomes an invitation for other cultures and other languages to feel welcome to become part of English and to make it their own.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting thing. I was looking at some statistics about how most of the people that speak English, it's not their first language. So, I mean, there's more people that speak English as a second, third, fourth, fifth language than there are people that speak it as a native language. So it's the ownership of English does not belong to the English native speakers per se.
Excellent point. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
So one other thing that came out of that class, though, was this question about what does it feel like to if English is something that a lot of people associate with school, or sort of like the kind of legal or official infrastructure of a country, what does it feel like to nature journal in a language that has that association, as opposed to nature journaling or writing about nature in a language that you learned from your mom or something in the home?
Well, we're all taught in school that there's a right way to use English, and they would get punished for using language wrong, for spelling things wrong, for grammatical errors. And we're all trained that there's a right way to use language and the right way to use English, which flies in the face of how fluid and creative English is. And let's see what I was going to say about that. And I think it's really important to just give yourself permission to play with language and not feel like there's only one right way to do it. So.
Okay, so that seems like that's kind of the main underlying principle here, is to think of English as something that is sort of like co-created, and that we are all we are all authors of a collaborative dictionary of the English language, and to play with it and be creative, and not just follow the rules or be afraid to break the rules that someone else created.
Well, if you're not experimenting, then the language becomes dead and static, and it's more easily controlled. So I will say that there is a reason for having language be efficient. I mean, to have the rules that everyone follows and the right spellings, that makes language very efficient. And there are good, legitimate reasons to have efficient language. But at the same time, you have to question, what is the purpose of efficient language? And I feel like it's to grease the wheels so that power and money moves in one direction, right? It's to control people, it's to control thinking, and it's to control where power is located. And there might be reasons to play with language and experiment with it, right? That fly in the face of that. We don't all have to be automatons and robots pumping out the same script every single day. There's a room in a vibrant culture for some people to follow the rules and be efficient, and other people to play and experiment and get crazy and bring in new ideas into the mix. And that combination is what makes a beautiful, vibrant society and culture, I think.
Okay, I have one last language question, and I've been sort of thinking about this since I saw you speak at Lake Merritt many years ago. You said something there about legibility, and how making something easy for someone to read might not actually matter that much. So the example I see used a lot is punctuation, or the full stop, the period, and how that supposedly made it easier for people to like read or sing Bible songs or psalms or something. So on a nature journal page, for example, how important is it for someone else to be able to read that easily? And when might it actually be interesting to make someone have to read something more slowly, or actually have trouble or kind of work to read it? One person, I don't know if you've seen Vitor Velez, his work, he uses writing in the background, and it's very aesthetic, integrated into his drawings, but it's hard to read. And I think a lot of people, when they're nature journaling, their notes might be kind of quick. How do you see the legibility thing playing a role?
Well, I mean, these are all, what's the word for it I had? I mean, they're all nuances and suggestions. I mean, you want to inspire people's imagination and their hearts, and the words don't need to be legible if they invoke mystery and inquiry and curiosity. I think that's probably the deeper and larger role for language and any kind of artistic creation, is to invoke mystery and engagement. And so if you have fragments of words or partly illegible words, I guess I say illegible words, I can't even say it, that's probably fine if it inspires mystery and curiosity, right?
Okay, got it. Sorry, I don't know why. I don't know why my sound is having this echo, especially since I'm using headphones and I've tried using multiple different mics. So I'm really sorry about that, everyone. Not sure what's going on there. Really sorry about that. Okay, so let's go forward here just a little bit.
And I can also bring this back to the naturalist world if you want to, a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what I wanted to go to next after words is birds. So you've written a lot about birds, and birds are very vocal and auditory species as well. What is the interest in birds? Why birds?
Well, I have spent my whole life as a naturalist, and I look at everything in the natural world. But the reality is, I also have to make a living and try to survive. And so, if you're teaching natural history or writing about natural history, you're going to have much better success if you're offering a class on birds than mushrooms or beetles or something. Or you're going to sell a lot more books if you write a bird book than if you if you write a book on mushrooms of the Bay Area or something. So it's partly because that's where you find your audience. I love birds and I love looking at birds, and for a long time it was a deep passion of mine. But it's also partly just a practical solution to where you find your audience. And being a naturalist is already a very lonely calling, and we're lucky to have things like the Nature Journal Club where we can come together and have conversations. But that's a pretty new thing. Most of my life, I have not found groups where you could have conversations like this and an audience where people wanted to engage. So if you wanted to do anything, you really wanted to focus on birds because there was so much interest in birds, say 20 years ago or so. So how's that for you? Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
My other question about birds is if you could only teach one thing to people who are just starting to learn about birds, like if you could only give them one lesson, what would you tell them?
Yeah. Well, generally people that are studying birds are doing it to learn how to identify birds or bird songs. And it's overwhelming. There's 900 species of birds in North America, and so many that are so similar that I would even struggle as an expert bird watcher. So the advice I give is that just start simple and realize there's already 5 or 10 species that you know the songs of or you know how to identify. They might be crow, they might be an American goldfinch, it might be a robin. I don't know what bird you have in your area, but you already know a couple birds, and just be really happy and fluent with those birds. And then every year add a couple birds to the mix. Learn how to identify 2 or 3 or 4 new birds by visual characteristics or song, and just have that be okay. Don't be overwhelmed thinking you had to pick up a field guide and learn every single bird of North America or every single bird of the West Coast. That's overwhelming. Just pick a couple that you love and connect with that you can recognize easily, and just fall in love with them and be totally comfortable identifying those and recognizing those. Make those your friends, and then over time, as your interest dictates, add more species to it one by one, slowly over time. And don't worry about being overwhelmed. So that's the most important thing, is just fall in love with a handful of birds and focus on those, and just add to that as you have the capacity or desire to learn more. Yeah.
Great. Cool. All right, let's do a little lightning round here. Some of these I'm going to adapt a little bit, but
great questions, by the way.
Yeah. Thanks. If you could go on a hike with any historical figure or naturalist, who would you go with?
Thoreau, without a doubt. People don't get what Thoreau was doing, and what he was doing was probably the most profound thing anyone's ever tried to do. So I really would love to be with him. So, anyway.
Great. You're going to be stranded on a deserted island. Thoreau is not going to be there. What 5 sort of natural history / note-taking journaling supplies would you take with you? All your survival is going to be taken care of. You just need natural history journal supplies.
Binoculars, a huge stack of these little pocket notebooks, probably a hand lens, and enough writing instruments. Oh, that's 4 journals. Well, nowadays my camera.
All right.
That
Great.
anyway.
Okay. All right. All right. If there was a nature journaling Olympics, which event would you compete in?
Decathlon. How about that?
All right. What would be the elements in the decathlon, the nature journal decathlon?
How about quick note taking, like from research?
Mhm.
um, uh, telling stories in nature. Oh, I set myself up to come with a bunch.
Wait, how many things are in the decathlon?
I have no idea.
Okay, well,
Five.
that sounds good already.
Exactly.
All right. Which fictional character would be best at nature journaling?
uh, can I admit that I don't read fiction?
You've never read like Lord of the Rings, or what about
Oh,
movies?
that Lord of the Rings isn't fiction. That's life. It's like I haven't read that entire book, that series of books, at least 20 times in my life. It's the very first book I ever bought in my life, and I have
Okay,
read
great.
it
I
almost every
knew I
year.
knew it. I had a feeling there. So which Lord of the Rings character would be best at nature journaling?
Aragorn, without a question.
All right, Strider all the way. Okay, cool. All
Deep,
right,
deep observation of nature. Yep.
great. Um, this is my last couple questions here. So, what do you think the future of nature journaling is?
I think from what I'm seeing right now, much, much greater sense of community and collaboration and the incredible building of energy among many, many like-minded people all over the world. Now that's an incredible development. Yeah.
Mm, wow,
Better than
really
technique,
cool.
just a community of people finding each other and being able to find that they're not alone in what they love and care about and sharing their work and their insights and their ideas and their concerns and doubts and everything. That's amazing.
Mm, cool. That's awesome. All right. So, and then my last question is, what do you think the role is that nature journalers can play in the current sort of the multiple environmental crises and climate change and all the stuff that's happening in the world?
Well, I'm very lucky that I live in a rural community that has very, very rich, vibrant artistic community, and I see that all the expressions of the artists and art shows and readings and talks and um, musical events just really keep the spirit of a community alive, and I think that that's going to be the role is just adding adding the human element to all these conversations, keeping it fresh and alive for everyone. The fight that we're all doing to save the world and understand who we are as a people at this moment in time. We're all struggling together. No one has the answers. We're all helping each other understand what it's like to be alive right now. And I think nature journalers could play a really critical role in that by bringing the natural world into the conversation of what it means to be alive right now.
Wow, that is awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight, David. And I just want to mention our class again. We're going to be teaching a landscape drawing class for your nature journals, and David's going to be leading us on a virtual tour through the mountains near him. And we're going to be making paintings in our nature journals based on those. You can find out more at the link I just posted in the comments. And if you're one of the 3 people that got free, I think it was Orpheus, Angie, and Danny, please message me on Facebook or email me or something so that I can make sure to get you your free passes. And everyone who joined in on the live, thank you so much.
Nice.
And for everyone who's watching this as a recorded, thanks for joining in.
Thank you so much, Marley. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Take care.
All right, great. Well, we're signing off now. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Bye.